The Louisiana air in 1858 wasn't just weather, it was a presence. Thick and almost alive, it carried the heavy perfume of damp earth, rotting leaves, and sugar cane so sweet it clung to everything. That air settled on your skin and worked its way into your bones, and more often than not, it carried secrets with it. But none of those secrets came close to the one hidden beneath the decaying grandeur of Belchase Plantation. None of them felt quite so fundamentally wrong. Picture this, if you will. Not a ghost story, not some whispered memory passed down through generations, but a real living child. A breathing human being discovered not in a field somewhere, not wandering lost along some dusty road, but in the suffocating blackness underneath the floorboards of a sprawling antebellum home. Completely alone. How long had she been down there? Nobody could say for sure. What kept her alive? What did she eat or drink? How did she survive the rats, the snakes, that oppressive humidity, that crushing endless isolation? The questions stacked up, just like the Spanish moss hanging from those ancient oaks, each one heavier than the last, each one pointing toward something darker, hiding underneath the surface. This wasn't some tale about a child lost in the woods or a runaway found hiding in a barn somewhere. This was something else entirely. This was a child who had somehow made a home in that forgotten space between the earth and the foundations of a house. A house filled with people who claimed they knew every single soul on their vast property. But here's the question that still haunts anyone who hears this story. Why did nobody report her missing? Why was nobody searching for her? Just think about that for a second. A small silent life existing in that unseen void right beneath everyone's feet. The thought alone is enough to make your blood run cold, enough to turn the grandest hall into the loneliest tomb you can imagine. That discovery didn't just unravel a mystery. It tore apart everything the Vogeland family thought they understood about their world and about themselves. It stands as proof that sometimes the most horrifying things aren't the ones that scream at you. They're the ones that simply exist, quietly waiting in those forgotten corners where human indifference hides. Before we go any deeper into what really happened at Belchase Plantation, drop a comment real quick and let me know where you're listening from today. And if you're new to the Fear Sermon, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and tap the bell while you're at it. We bring you new stories every single week, and trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. All right, let's head back to Louisiana now. 1858. Belchase wasn't just some random collection of buildings out in the middle of nowhere. It was an empire carved out of that fertile but unforgiving Louisiana soil. You'd find it on the western bank of that mighty Mississippi River, about 40 miles south of Baton Rouge, with sugar cane fields stretching for miles in every direction. Those fields looked like a whispering green sea under that relentless summer sun. The main house itself stood 2 stories tall with wide verandas and towering white columns that once represented the finest French, Creole elegance money could buy. But by 1858, you could see decay creeping in around the edges, paint peeling here and there, a shutter hanging slightly crooked, that persistent dampness in the air that even strong river breezes couldn't chase away. The smell of molasses, thick and cloying from the nearby sugar mill, mixed with that earthy river smell, and just a hint of something metallic from the cane fields. It created this unique, almost intoxicating perfume that defined Belchase completely. Armand Vogeland ran the place, a man in his early 50s who traced his bloodline back to the first French settlers in the territory. He had sharp features and pale, calculating blue eyes that seemed to catch everything while revealing absolutely nothing. He moved through the world with this quiet, predatory grace, his mind always working on ledgers and crop yields and the brutal mathematics of keeping his enterprise running. People in the parish respected him. He represented order and tradition, and his word carried as much weight as those cypress timbers holding up his house. But there was something cold living inside Armand, an emotional distance that kept everyone at arm's length, even his closest associates. He viewed the world in terms of what he owned and what he owed, and human lives, especially the ones under his control, usually fell into the second category. His wife Adelaide came from a prominent South Carolina family, a woman in her late 40s who couldn't have been more different from her husband. They raised her with delicate sensibilities, educated her in literature and music, filled her with quiet, fragile faith. The opulence of Belchase, the sheer scale of its operation, and the brutality that kept it all running never sat right with her. She spent her days managing the household, overseeing the domestic staff, and tending her small, carefully kept rose garden. That splash of color stood out against all those muted greens and browns everywhere else. She carried deep, unspoken anxieties with her, and her discomfort with the world she lived in showed up in her perpetual pale complexion and her habit of retreating into quiet solitude whenever she could. She wanted a different life, a different time even. But the currents running through her existence ran too strong to fight against. Nettie moved through that grand house with almost invisible efficiency, an enslaved woman in her early 30s with skin the color of rich earth and dark, intelligent eyes that missed absolutely nothing happening in the Vogland household. She served as Armand's personal valet and Adelaide's most trusted domestic, a position that gave her a unique view of everything, though a precarious one for sure. She knew every rhythm of that house, caught every unspoken tension, noticed every subtle shift in mood that might signal trouble ahead. Nettie carried quiet strength inside her, sharp observations, and when anyone bothered to ask her opinion, she delivered wisdom born from sheer necessity and survival. They trusted her, yes, but trust in that world meant something fragile, always conditional, always shadowed by that thread of arbitrary power hanging over everything. Beyond the main house, stretching out into that shimmering heat, you'd find the quarters where the enslaved community lived. Hundreds of souls worked those cane fields, their lives dictated by sunrise and sunset, by what the crop needed, by whatever mood struck their masters. That community existed as a world inside another world, vibrant and resilient, forged in hardship, with its own language and customs, its own hidden knowledge passing down through generations. Whispers traveled faster than any horse could run, and secrets stayed protected by fierce collective loyalty. Deputy Sheriff Thibodeau carried a perpetually wary expression on his face, a man in his 40s who represented local law in the area. He wasn't cruel exactly, not openly anyway, but he belonged to his time and place completely. Maintaining the established order meant everything to him. His pragmatism usually bordered on indifference, and his investigations never went very deep if they threatened to disturb the delicate power balance in the parish. He preferred quiet resolutions, even when that meant looking away from uncomfortable truths that needed facing. Reverend Fenn showed up as an itinerant Methodist preacher in his 60s, a familiar if somewhat eccentric figure around Belchase. He visited the plantation every few months, holding services for both the Vogland family and the enslaved community. His sermons blended fire and brimstone with quiet, compassionate counsel. Genuine faith lived in that man, and his eyes often held a sadness that spoke of deep understanding when it came to human suffering. He saw more than most people did, and his quiet observations carried weight that others tended to dismiss. 4 months before that strange discovery, a young girl named Celeste had gone missing from Belchase. Just a child, 7 or 8 years old, enslaved like so many others. The way everyone handled her disappearance still chills me to think about. Armand simply noted it in his ledger as a loss, a minor inconvenience in the larger scheme of running his operation. Adelaide expressed some fleeting concern, offered a quiet prayer. But her own life demanded so much attention that the memory of a child she barely knew got pushed aside pretty quickly. Among the enslaved community, though, Celeste's absence left a gaping wound that wouldn't heal. Whispers circulated constantly. Sold south, some said, which happened often enough when children's parents caused trouble or when their labor stopped, turning a profit. Others whispered about something more sinister, a quiet disappearance into that vast, indifferent landscape. But nobody really searched for her. No official report ever got filed beyond Armand's ledger entry. Celeste just vanished, swallowed up by the insatiable machinery of the plantation system, leaving behind only this lingering sense of unease, this shadow stretching across those sun-drenched fields at Belchase. And then the sounds started. Faint at first, easy to write off as rats scuttling around or old timbers settling. But they grew slowly, persistently, until nobody could deny them anymore. Rhythmic scratching, soft, almost melodic humming, coming from the very earth underneath that house. A sound that promised to shatter whatever fragile piece Belchase had left and reveal something far more terrifying than anyone could have imagined. Those sounds crept in gradually. Nettie first noticed a faint scratching while polishing silver in the dining room. This rhythmic, insistent whisper, like tiny claws dragging across rough wood, or maybe some small creature digging around down there. She dismissed it at first, blamed it on the usual nighttime noises an old house makes. Rats in the walls, wind playing tricks with loose shutters, ancient beams creaking and settling. But as days turned into a week, that scratching grew more distinct, more deliberate somehow. It stopped sounding random and started having a pattern. Soft and rhythmic, sometimes accompanied by this faint high-pitched hum like a child singing a lullaby through a thick blanket. Nettie mentioned it to Adelaide, keeping her voice carefully neutral. "Mistress, there's a peculiar sound beneath the house near the dining room. Been hearing it for days now." Adelaide, distracted by some wilting rose bush, waved her hand dismissively. "Likely just field mice, Nettie. The heat brings them in. Have one of the boys set traps?" When someone told Armand about it, he just grunted without looking up from his ledger. "Nonsense. The foundations are solid. It's the wind, woman, or your imagination." He had no patience for trivial matters, especially with sugar prices fluctuating the way they were. But those sounds kept going, growing bolder and more insistent. At night, in that oppressive stillness that settled over the house, they became impossible to ignore. Adelaide usually slept soundly, but she found herself lying awake straining to hear, her heart quickening with every faint scratch, every ghostly hum. It wasn't just a sound anymore. It felt like a presence, this persistent, unsettling vibration coming from the very core of the earth underneath her home. She started imagining things, dark slithering things burrowing deeper, getting closer. The thought made her skin crawl. Finally, after nearly 10 days of this auditory torture, Adelaide confronted Armand with a rare flash of desperation. "Armand, I cannot sleep. There is something beneath the house. It is not mice. It is different." Her voice sounded thin and reedy with exhaustion and fear. Armand, annoyed by her persistence, sighed dramatically. "Very well, Adelaide. I will investigate this phantom menace myself. But I warn you, if it is merely a family of possums, I shall expect you to apologize for disturbing my sleep." That night arrived humid and moonless, the air hanging thick and completely still. Armand Vogland took a lantern and descended into that crawl space, underneath Belchase. The entrance sat hidden behind a small wooden hatch near the back of the house, usually covered by a heavy stone. When he lifted it, a wave of cool damp air rolled up at him, heavy with the smell of rich black earth and decaying vegetation. He lowered himself into that narrow opening, the lantern casting dancing shadows that stretched and contorted around the ancient cypress piers, holding up his house. That crawl space felt like a labyrinth made of darkness and dampness. The ground mixed packed earth with mud, slick in places, and the air hung thick with mildew and something else, something faintly animal, but not entirely unpleasant either. Spiderwebs, thick and glistening, brushed against his face, and he could hear occasional scuttling sounds of unseen creatures echoing in that oppressive silence. Armand, a man who lived for order and control, felt a rare tremor of unease run through him. This was the wild, untamed underbelly of his meticulously ordered world. He moved slowly and carefully, his boots sinking slightly into that soft earth. The lantern beam cut through the gloom, illuminating roots snaking like ancient serpents and the rough, unfinished undersides of floorboards above him. He reached the area directly under the dining room, where those persistent sounds seemed to come from. He paused and held his breath, listening, and then he heard it. Not scratching or humming, but this faint, almost imperceptible thump, 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 like a tiny muffled heartbeat. It came from directly beneath the floorboards, just a few feet from where he stood. He raised the lantern and let its light pierce those deepest shadows. And there, huddled in a small scooped-out hollow in the earth between two massive cypress piers, sat a child. Small, impossibly small. Her body curled into a tight ball with her knees drawn up to her chest, her hair tangled into dark, matted curls streaked with mud and dust that hid most of her face. Her skin, pale but with a darker complexion underneath, looked grimy. But beneath all that dirt, it held this translucent quality, like she hadn't seen real sunlight in months. Her clothes had deteriorated into rags, hard to identify in that dim light, but they seemed made from coarse homespun cotton. When that lantern light fell across her, she slowly and deliberately uncurled. Her head lifted, and two enormous dark eyes, wide and unblinking, met Armand's gaze. Those eyes held no fear, no surprise, no recognition whatsoever. Only a profound ancient stillness, reflecting that lantern light like polished obsidian mirrors. Around her in that small hollow, a few crude handmade items sat scattered. A small chipped clay cup half buried in the earth, a piece of torn fabric faded and worn but still showing a faint pattern if you looked closely, and clutched in her small dirt-caked hand, a tiny intricately carved wooden bird with its wings spread. Like it was flying silently through the air. She didn't cry out. She didn't flinch or try to scramble away. She just sat there completely silent, completely still, those dark eyes fixed on Armand, a living, breathing mystery in that suffocating darkness underneath Belchase. The silence stretched out thick and heavy, broken only by the frantic pounding of Armand's own heart. He came down there expecting rats, maybe a stray dog. He found something far more terrifying instead. A child living alone in the dark right beneath his feet, a silent testament to some truth he couldn't yet comprehend. The morning after that discovery dawned with brutal, unyielding heat. But inside Belchase the air felt colder than any winter night. They brought that child into the house, still silent, her small dirt-caked form standing out against all that polished mahogany and gleaming brass. Nettie kept her face carefully controlled as she gently washed the child, revealing skin the color of warm honey marked by faint scratches and insect bites. Her hair, once matted, now framed her face in a soft, dark cloud, surprisingly delicate features underneath, though gaunt from hunger. And those eyes, still enormous and dark, seemed to absorb all light, reflecting nothing back but a profound, unnerving emptiness. When Adelaide saw that child in harsh daylight, she gasped and covered her mouth with her hand. The girl was clearly malnourished, thin limbs and slightly distended belly. But those eyes disturbed her most of all. They held the wisdom of ages somehow, yet also the innocence of something untouched by human interaction. Armand kept his rigid composure together, jaw tight. He had already sent someone for Dr. Prout, the local physician known for his pragmatic approach to everything from physical ailments to moral questions. Dr. Prout showed up an hour later, a portly man in his 50s with a perpetually skeptical expression and a medical bag that smelled faintly of antiseptic and stale tobacco. He examined the child with clinical detachment, his fingers probing her small frame, his stethoscope pressed against her tiny chest. He noted her rapid, shallow breathing, the faint tremor in her hands, the dullness of her reflexes. Malnutrition, certainly, he pronounced in his gruff voice, and likely some form of sensory deprivation. She's been living in darkness, I'd wager, perhaps for months. He carefully avoided speculating about how she ended up there or why nobody noticed her missing. His job meant diagnosing physical problems, not moral ones. He prescribed small, frequent meals, rich broths, plenty of fresh water. He also suggested quiet, gentle interaction, though he doubted it would accomplish much. "She's like a wild thing, Mrs. Vogland," he observed while wiping his hands on a linen cloth. "Needs to be coaxed back to the world." That child, true to Dr. Prout's assessment, refused to speak. She ate when someone placed food before her, consuming it with quiet intensity, while her eyes never left the person feeding her. She watched everything, that gaze following every movement, every flicker of emotion across the faces around her. She made no sounds, not whimpers, not sighs. She simply existed as a silent observer in a world suddenly and bewilderingly full of light and noise. Adelaide, despite her initial shock, found herself drawn to that child. She would sit with her for hours in the parlor, reading aloud from her favorite novels in that soft, melodic voice. The child would listen, those dark eyes fixed on Adelaide's face, though whether she understood any words remained impossible to tell. Adelaide would brush her hair, gently working out the tangles, and the child would allow it, her body staying still and almost pliant. A profound loneliness lived in that child's silence, and it resonated with something in Adelaide, some unspoken isolation of her own. Deputy Sheriff Thibodeau arrived later that afternoon with a grim face. Armand had sent for him, hoping for swift, discreet resolution. Thibodeau questioned Armand first, then Adelaide, his questions circling around the obvious. Who is she? Where did she come from? How long was she down there? Armand offered vague answers, insisting he had no idea, that she must have wandered onto the property somehow. Thibodeau knew the rhythms of this parish, and that explanation just didn't sit right. A child living under a house for months, without anyone noticing. It strained all credibility. He tried questioning the child himself, kneeling before her with surprisingly gentle voice. "Little one, can you tell me your name? Where are your mama and papa?" The child just stared back with those unblinking dark eyes, her silence absolute. Thibodeau sighed and ran his hand over his tired face. This was going to get complicated. If this story is already getting under your skin, good. That means we're doing our job right here on the Fear Sermon. Before we keep going, take a second to hit that like button. It genuinely helps us keep bringing you stories like this one. And drop a comment with your theory. What do you think was really happening at Belchase? We want to hear what you're thinking. Now, back to 1858. It was Nettie who made the crucial discovery while carefully folding that child's few rags. Among those tattered remnants of what might have once been a dress, she found a small triangular piece of fabric tucked into a seam. A vibrant blue cotton patterned with tiny white flowers, a distinctive print that Nettie recognized instantly. Her breath caught in her throat. She knew that fabric. She had seen it before on a dress that belonged to Celeste. The same Celeste who went missing 4 months ago, supposedly sold south. Nettie's hands trembled as she held that fabric, her mind racing through possibilities. If this child had Celeste's dress, what did that mean? Was this Celeste? No, impossible. This child was too small, too young. Celeste had been around 8 years old. This child looked no older than 5, maybe 6. But that fabric was undeniable. A thread, fragile yet strong, connecting this silent child from under the floor to the vanished girl Celeste, and to some truth Belchase had desperately tried to bury. Reverend Fenn arrived for his quarterly visit a week after they found the child. His worn leather Bible clutched in one hand, his eyes already carrying that familiar sorrowful gaze. He saw the world through a lens of quiet suffering, and the atmosphere at Belchase, usually marked by strained politeness, now thrummed with almost palpable tension. He greeted Armand and Adelaide, his questions about their health met with clipped evasive answers. Nettie, keeping her face carefully impassive, led him to the parlor where that child sat silent and watchful in a large armchair. The moment Reverend Fenn's eyes fell upon that child, a flicker of profound recognition crossed his face, followed by deep aching sorrow. He knelt before her, his gnarled hand reaching out, then hesitating. "Little one," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "You have Celeste's eyes." He looked up at Adelaide with piercing gaze. "This child reminds me so much of Celeste. The way she holds herself, the quietness." Adelaide, flustered, explained how they found the child, while carefully omitting that piece of fabric. Reverend Fenn listened, his expression growing graver with every word. He had known Celeste well. Unlike so many others, he had seen beyond her status and recognized a sharp, inquisitive mind living inside that child. In secret during his visits, he had been teaching her to read and write, using Bible passages as their primer. Celeste had been a quick study, her small fingers tracing letters with eager intensity, her mind absorbing knowledge like a sponge. She had been a bright, curious spark in a world determined to extinguish all such lights. Through fragmented accounts from Nettie and others in the enslaved community, a clearer, yet more disturbing picture of Celeste began emerging. That child had unusual perception. She noticed things others missed, pieced together observations that seemed disconnected. She spent much of her time in the main house running errands, helping Nettie, and often just watching everything unfold. She had a particular fascination with the papers Armand kept in his study. She would see him poring over ledgers with furrowed brow, his pen scratching across pages. Nettie recalled Celeste asking her once, "Nettie, why does Master Armand write so many numbers? And why do some of the numbers not match the people?" Nettie had dismissed it quickly, telling Celeste not to concern herself with the master's business, a warning born from genuine fear. But Celeste, it seemed, hadn't heeded that warning. She had started asking questions, quiet, innocent questions, but questions that in the context of Belchase meant danger. She had noticed discrepancies, small inconsistencies in the records she glimpsed, especially concerning the movement of enslaved people and the financial entries that corresponded with them. She had seen a specific ledger bound in dark leather that Armand kept locked in his desk, a ledger she once saw him consult with a man from New Orleans while their voices dropped low and urgent. The night Celeste disappeared, 3 other things happened at the same time. Events that seemed unrelated back then but now, in the shadow of this silent child, took on chilling significance. First, A small but valuable silver locket belonging to Adelaide went missing from her dressing table. Adelaide had been distraught, accusing one of the house servants, though nobody confessed, and they never found that locket. Second, a fierce storm swept through the parish, bringing torrential rains and high winds that knocked out power and felled several ancient trees near the river. That chaos provided perfect cover for any clandestine activity someone might want hidden. And third, a new overseer named Silas Croft arrived at Belchase, known for brutal efficiency and unquestioning loyalty to Armand. He replaced the previous more lenient overseer who had suddenly and without explanation been dismissed. These events happening together, a missing locket, a violent storm, a new ruthless overseer, now seemed less like coincidence and more like carefully orchestrated moves designed to obscure something far darker. Celeste, it appeared, had stumbled onto something she wasn't meant to see. Something Armand desperately needed kept hidden, and this silent child with Celeste's eyes and Celeste's fabric provided living, breathing proof of that terrible secret. The discovery of that child and the unsettling implications of Celeste's fabric cast a long, cold shadow over Belchase. Adelaide, usually a creature of habit, found her routines disrupted, her thoughts consumed by that silent girl, now occupying a small room off the kitchen. The child, whom Adelaide had tentatively named Lily, because the name seemed to suit her delicate, almost ethereal presence, remained mute, those dark eyes observing everything with unnerving intensity. One sweltering afternoon with Armand away in Baton Rouge on plantation business, and the house staff occupied with endless chores, Adelaide found herself alone in the vast, echoing silence of Belchase. A strange, almost magnetic pull drew her toward Armand's private study, a room she rarely entered, that sanctuary of ledgers and documents that had always felt forbidden. A space embodying Armand's cold, calculating world, a world she had always instinctively recoiled from, but now a desperate, gnawing curiosity fueled by that silent child and the ghost of Celeste propelled her forward. The study looked exactly as Armand left it, meticulously organized, the air thick with old paper, leather, and pipe tobacco. Bookshelves lined every wall, filled with volumes on agriculture, law, and economics. A large, heavy mahogany desk dominated the center with its surface clear, except for a silver inkwell, a quill pen, and neatly bound papers. Adelaide's heart hammered against her ribs as she approached that desk, her fingers trembling slightly. She knew Armand kept his most important documents, his most sensitive records in a locked drawer. She tried the top drawer first. Locked. Then the second. Also locked. A wave of despair washed over her. How could she find anything down here? Then her gaze fell upon a small, ornate silver key, half hidden beneath a stack of financial reports on a side table. Armand was usually so meticulous about things like this. Had he forgotten it, or had he in his haste simply overlooked it? A shiver ran down her spine. It felt less like an oversight and more like a deliberate, almost taunting invitation. With a deep, shaky breath, Adelaide picked up that key, cold and heavy in her palm. She returned to the desk, and with a soft click the third drawer slid open. Inside, nestled among other documents, lay a single dark leather-bound ledger, thicker and older and more worn than the others she had seen Armand consult. This was it. The ledger Celeste had glimpsed, the one holding numbers that didn't match. Adelaide pulled it out with clammy hands. The leather felt smooth and cool beneath her fingertips. She opened it, and that faint, musty scent of aged paper filled her nostrils. Pages filled with Armand's precise, elegant script, columns of figures, dates, and names. But these weren't just names of crops or supplies. These were names of people. And next to many of them, chillingly, dates of acquisition and disposition. She began reading, her eyes scanning entries, her breath catching in her throat. Records of sales, purchases, transfers to other plantations. But then she saw entries that made her blood run cold, names followed by dates, and then instead of a sale price or new location, cryptic notations. Lost to fever. Runaway, presumed deceased. Disappeared, no trace. And beneath these, often a small, almost imperceptible financial adjustment. A quiet write-off. The horror of paperwork, of accounting, of a system so normalized that human lives, and their sudden, unexplained cessation got recorded with the same dispassionate precision as a damaged tool or a failed crop. Her gaze fell upon a specific entry dated 4 months prior. Celeste, next to the name, not sold to Mr. Dubois or transferred to Evergreen Plantation, simply disappeared. No trace. Value adjusted, and then a small, almost imperceptible symbol, a tiny hand, drawn bird identical to the one that silent child clutched. Adelaide's eyes darted back to the previous page. There beneath another disappeared entry sat the same small bird, and another, and another. It wasn't a symbol of loss, she realized with sickening lurch. It was a symbol of disposal. A quiet, efficient way to erase a life, to make it disappear from the ledgers, from the world. And those financial adjustments, those value-adjusted notations weren't for losses at all. They were for gains. Quiet, untraceable profits from lives that simply vanished. Then her eyes caught something else tucked into the very back of that ledger, almost hidden. A small folded piece of paper, not Armand's neat script, but a child's crude, hesitant drawing. It showed a stick figure, small and alone, beneath a large looming house. And in the corner of that drawing, almost like a signature, the same tiny hand, carved wooden bird that Lily now held. Adelaide didn't take anything. She couldn't. Her hands shook too violently. She carefully placed that drawing back in the ledger, closed the dark leather cover, and returned it to the locked drawer. She replaced the key beneath those financial reports, her movements precise, almost mechanical. She closed the study door behind her, and that click of the latch echoed through the silent house. That evening she sat at the dinner table in the grand dining room, bathed in soft candlelight. Armand returned from Baton Rouge, talking about sugar prices and new machinery. Adelaide listened with distant gaze. She passed him the butter, her fingers brushing his, and felt profound, chilling revulsion. She looked at his cold, calculating eyes, his precise movements. And she knew exactly what he was. And she knew she would never look at him the same way again. The horror wasn't in screams. It lived in the silence, in that ledger, in the quiet, efficient erasure of lives, and in that small hand, carved bird connecting vanished Celeste to the silent child beneath the floor. Just when we thought we understood what happened at Belchase, the horror goes deeper. And it's not the screaming kind. It's the kind that whispers your name when you're alone. If this story is giving you chills on the fear sermon, share it with a friend who loves dark mysteries, and hit that like button so we know you're here with us. We've got so much more to reveal. That silent child Lily remained a mystery to everyone but Adelaide. Days turned into weeks, and still no sound escaped her lips. Dr. Prout's gentle coaxing, Nettie's patient care, Reverend Fenn's soft hymns, nothing elicited a spoken word. Yet her eyes, those enormous dark pools of ancient stillness, missed nothing at all. Adelaide, in a moment of quiet inspiration, offered Lily a piece of charcoal and a sheet of paper. The child took them, her small fingers closing around that charcoal with almost desperate grip, and then she began to draw. She drew with the ferocity and focus of someone trying to say everything they couldn't speak out loud, her small hand moving with surprising certainty. Over 2 weeks she produced 8 drawings, each one a revelation, each one answering one question while raising 3 more. They looked crude and innocent, drawn with simple childlike lines. Yet their content devastated everyone who saw them. The first drawing showed a large looming house with stark white columns and dark empty windows. Beneath that house, a small curled figure almost indistinguishable from the shadows. Belche's seen from below, from that crawl space perspective. The second drawing showed a tall, slender woman with long, flowing hair. Her face stayed indistinct, but her hands reached out like she was pleading. Next to her stood a smaller figure, a child with the same distinctive, dark matted curls as Lily. This, Adelaide realized with a jolt, was Celeste and maybe her mother or some other woman who had cared for her. The third drawing looked more abstract, swirling dark lines like a storm. Within that storm, you could barely make out falling trees, and a small, terrified face peering out from behind a thick root. The night Celeste disappeared. The night of that great storm seen through a child's eyes hiding beneath the house. The fourth drawing chilled everyone with its simplicity. It showed a tall, imposing man with his face a blank oval, his hand holding some small dark object. Next to him stood another smaller figure with a distinctive cruel sneer on his face. Silas Croft, the new overseer, and that blank-faced man could only be Armand. The dark object in Armand's hand stayed ambiguous, but the implication came through loud and clear. The fifth drawing showed numbers crudely scrolled but recognizable as figures. Beneath them, a small hand-drawn bird identical to the one Lily clutched and the one Adelaide found in Armand's ledger. Celeste's attempt to communicate the numbers she had seen. The discrepancies she noticed, the financial adjustments marking a life erased. The sixth drawing disturbed everyone most of all. It showed a small open box with something dark and indistinct inside. Above the box, a hand dropping something into it, and around the box several small dark figures like shadows watching. A depiction of something being hidden, something buried, something disposed of. The seventh drawing showed a silver locket with distinctive engraving. Adelaide's locket, the one that vanished the night Celeste disappeared. The child had seen it, had witnessed its disappearance, and through her art she revealed its fate now. The eighth and final drawing hit hardest of all, a stark, almost brutal image showing a small figure curled beneath a house. But this time above that house, a single enormous eye wide open and watching. The child's self-portrait, a testament to her existence, her silent vigil, her profound, terrifying witness to everything that happened. Adelaide laid those drawings out on the parlor table. With an aching heart, she knew with bone-chilling certainty that these weren't mere childish scribbles. They were testimony. Silent confession, a horrifying narrative told through charcoal and paper. Armand returned from Baton Rouge that evening with sour mood from difficult negotiations. He entered the parlor expecting to find Adelaide engaged in her usual quiet pursuits. Instead, he found her standing over that table with pale face and eyes fixed on those drawings. He approached with furrowed brow full of annoyance. "What is this, Adelaide?" More of the child's nonsense. His voice died in his throat as his eyes fell upon those images. The house from below, the storm, the numbers, the locket, and finally that enormous watching eye, his face usually so composed, contorted into pure, unadulterated rage. Where did she get these ideas? He roared, his voice echoing through that silent house. Who has been filling her head with such fabrications? Adelaide met his gaze, her usually timid eyes now burning with quiet, fierce resolve. She drew what she saw, Armand, what she witnessed. What you did. That confrontation turned brutal, a clash of wills that had simmered beneath their marriage surface for years. Armand denied everything, his denials growing more frantic and desperate as Adelaide calmly pointed to each drawing and explained its horrifying significance. He accused her of madness, of succumbing to enslaved people's superstitions. But Adelaide held firm with steady voice and unwavering conviction. She knew, and he knew that she knew. The next day, Deputy Sheriff Thibodeau returned to Belchase, summoned by a terse note from Armand. He found Armand pacing the parlor with flushed face and wild eyes. Adelaide sat quietly with those drawings neatly stacked beside her. Thibodeau preferred avoiding unpleasantness whenever possible. But he listened to Armand's agitated accusations against Adelaide, then turned his gaze to those drawings. His wary eyes scanned each image, and slow, dawning comprehension spread across his face. He recognized that locket. He recognized that crude depiction of Silas Croft, a man he knew to be ruthless. He recognized those numbers, that chilling simplicity of disappeared entries. He looked at Armand, then at Adelaide, then back at those drawings. The silence in that room grew deafening. Before Thibodeau could speak, a carriage rumbled up the drive. Two stern-faced men in dark suits emerged. They came from Baton Rouge, sent by Armand's powerful associates, men with vested interest in maintaining delicate power balance and quiet commerce flow through the parish. Their arrival sent a clear message. This matter would be handled discreetly, efficiently, without scandal. But Reverend Fenn, quietly observing this unfolding drama, had already acted. While the household consumed itself with confrontations, he had taken opportunity to make careful, precise copies of each drawing. Sketching them onto sheets of paper, he kept sewn into his worn traveling coat lining. He knew with certainty born of faith and experience that these drawings meant more than just a child's art. They held truth needing preservation, a voice needing hearing, even if that hearing had to wait for a time when the world felt ready to listen. The arrival of those men from Baton Rouge signaled the long silence descending upon Belchase. They weren't lawmen in any traditional sense, but agents of influence whose purpose meant suppressing any burgeoning scandal, threatening delicate economic and social parish order. Deputy Sheriff Thibodeau understood unspoken rules of his world, and they quietly persuaded him to close his investigation. The official report would state that Lily was a runaway from some neighboring plantation suffering amnesia, and that Celeste had indeed been sold south to unknown whereabouts. They dismissed those drawings as confused imaginings from a traumatized child, but the truth ran far more insidious. They quietly removed Lily, that silent child, from Belchase. Her destination never got officially recorded. Some whispered about an orphanage in New Orleans. Others claimed a distant relative of Adelaide's took her far from prying Louisiana eyes. What became of her, whether she ever spoke again, whether she ever found peace, remained one of Belchase's many unanswered questions, swallowed by that vast indifferent landscape of the past. Adelaide Vogeland, though, made a decision costing her everything while saving something else. That confrontation with Armand, those chilling revelations from the ledger and drawings had shattered whatever fragile illusion her life rested upon. She could no longer live in that house of secrets under shadow of a man she now recognized as monster. Within weeks of Lily's removal, Adelaide announced her intention to leave Belchase, citing ill health and spiritual solace needs. She moved to a small, quiet cottage in Charleston, South Carolina, her childhood home, taking only personal effects and profound, unshakable sorrow with her. She never spoke of Belchase again, but in her quiet acts of charity, in her tireless work with orphan children, a silent testament lived on to the truth she carried inside. She saved her own soul, but that salvation cost her marriage, her home, and her peace of mind. Armand Vogeland remained at Belchase, outwardly untouched by those events. Those men from Baton Rouge ensured no official charges ever got filed, no public accusations ever made. But the long, quiet dissolution of that man had begun. The cold, calculating precision that once defined him slowly eroded away. He grew more withdrawn, with haunted eyes, his once impeccable ledgers now occasionally marred by errors, by numbers refusing to balance. The silence of Adelaide's departure, the ghost of Celeste, the memory of Lily's enormous watching eyes gnawed at him constantly. He never faced confrontation or charges, never got named in any official record. But that silence, that unspoken knowledge held by those who knew, became his prison. Belchase, once his empire, became his tomb. He died a decade later, a lonely, embittered man with diminished fortune and legacy tainted by whispers that never quite faded. Nettie carried her own truths with quiet resilience. In 1863, amid Civil War chaos, she seized an opportunity and left Belchase, making her way to New Orleans. She found work as a dressmaker, her sharp mind and observant nature serving her well in that bustling city. She never spoke of Belchase's secrets, but memories of Celeste and that silent child remained etched in her heart. Quiet sorrow she carried until her dying day. Reverend Fenn, however, refused to let truth stay buried. He continued his itinerant preaching, with sermons growing more impassioned, more focused on justice and inherent dignity of every soul. He kept those copied drawings carefully preserved, soon into his coat lining as silent promise. In 1871, an old man with failing body lay on his deathbed in a small rural Mississippi parsonage. He summoned a young man named De Vierox, a bright, earnest seminary student who often assisted him. To De Vierox, Fenn entrusted a small, worn wooden box smoothed with age. Inside, carefully wrapped in linen, lay those copied drawings and 3 pages of Fenn's own meticulous, handwritten testimony detailing Belchase events. That ledger, those disappearances, those chilling implications. "These aren't just drawings, son," Fenn had whispered with raspy voice. "They're a voice, a truth that must one day be heard." De Vierox carried integrity and deep conviction, and he understood the weight of trust placed upon him. He kept that box and guarded its contents with fierce protectiveness. He studied those drawings, read Fenn's testimony, and understood the profound human horror contained within. He knew the time wasn't right yet. That war wound stayed too fresh. That desire for forgetting ran too strong. But he believed, as Fenn had, that truth, like water, would eventually find its way to the surface. He would spend his life quietly advocating for justice, for memory, for voices silenced, always keeping that box and its terrible contents safe. And Belchase itself, that grand house once symbolizing wealth and power, slowly succumbed to relentless Louisiana wilderness embrace. Those sugar cane fields, once meticulously tended, grew overgrown, reclaimed by wild things. The verandas sagged, paint peeled, columns crumbled. The air grew heavy with decay scent, not just of leaves and wood, but of forgotten dreams and buried truths. And beneath it all, that crawl space stayed dark and damp, never used again. Nobody dared venture into its depths because everyone knew in that quiet, unspoken land language that it held not just earth, but echoes of a silent child, and the profound, terrifying truth of what lived and died beneath the floorboards of Belchase. This mystery from the Fear sermon shows us that the most terrifying things in history were never monsters hiding under beds. They were men sitting at dinner tables, and the silence of those who knew better. What do you think really happened at Belchase? Leave your theory in the comments below. I read every single one. If this story moved you, please subscribe, hit that notification bell, and share this with someone who needs to hear it.